Right, so rules as written, we are told that a familiar rolls its own initiative and can't attack, but can otherwise take an action in combat as normal, right? This means then that they could, yes, take the help action, which says that you basically distract a chosen enemy, and then the next attack made against that enemy that you have helped, or in this case that your familiar has helped, is made with advantage. That's rules as written. However, the way it works at every table that I have ever played at, yes, including Treant Monks and Monty's from the Dungeon Dudes, and my own home table, is like a homebrew version of this that just speeds up gameplay and simplifies things. The familiar basically goes on your turn and helps whoever they want to help, granting advantage to that character's first attack, very often the owner of the familiar. Not for the first time. I put a couple of different polls out on my channel a couple of weeks ago to sort of gauge where you all were on the issue, and in the end, the vast majority of you, nearly 80%, say that at your table, if you want to get advantage on your first attack from your familiar, you generally can, whether because it works like I've described at the tables that I've played at, right, or because of some other reason. And so even though I appreciate that it isn't strictly rules as written, since the vast majority of you seem to be able to get advantage from a familiar if you really want it, I tend to use the tactic in builds a fair bit. All of that said, let me take a moment to address some of the more common concerns that people expressed in the comments to that poll. The first is along the lines of, if a familiar uses that tactic more than once, they're dead. Okay, so yeah, that is a thing that can potentially happen. To that, I would say, first off, if you make your familiar an owl, like I usually mention, it has the flyby ability, which lets it disengage without taking an opportunity attack. And with 60 feet of fly speed, that's very often enough to get in, help, and fly to relative safety without getting hit. Of course, if the enemy has a ranged attack or can themselves fly, they might be able to take out the familiar anyways. And to that, I would say, if the enemy is using an attack and maybe even their movement to take out your familiar, then kudos to you. That's a win in my book. Totally worth it. And sure, familiars can get fairly easily wiped out with a big area of effect spell or, attack otherwise, right? But again, if you've got your owl staying relatively far away from the fight, that fireball or whatever probably got placed somewhat unoptimally to try and catch the familiar too. And I mean, how many enemies are you fighting that regularly have fireball or something like it? And also, finally, raw, I don't know that there's a reason you couldn't have your familiar just fly into your backpack every turn to stay safe. Maybe that's cheesy. Maybe your DM isn't going to allow it, but I've seen it work at a lot of tables. Worth asking your DM about. Okay, the other big comment I saw on that poll went something like, this is overpowered or cheesy or annoying, and we just don't allow it. And every time I see a build that depends on a familiar, I immediately lose interest and stop watching, etc., etc. I will say, though, that I don't think I've ever done a build that uses a familiar to grant advantage on one attack where the build depended on that advantage. And it was just worthless if it didn't work, right? The reality is, it's nice, sure, but at lower enemy ACs, it makes almost no difference to the numbers, and even at higher enemy ACs, especially for builds where you're getting more than one attack per turn, which is most of my damage-focused builds, it makes some difference, sure, but it's not huge. It definitely doesn't invalidate a build or anything. It's more like, if this doesn't work at your table, or if your DM likes to try and kill your familiar, that's fine, just lower your expectations slightly for damage numbers at the mid and higher enemy ACs,